Hello, John here again, and I'm back with my journey through Learn React course on Scrimba. And today's lesson I'm going to go through is called Why React It's Composable. What the hell does that mean? Let's find out, shall we? Get rid of me. Let's put me there. Bring this out a bit. Oops. Bookmarks. There we go. Let's go. Let's get it on.
Understanding why we even care to learn React. Let's spend a little bit of time understanding why we even care to learn React. One of the main reasons that people will talk about is how React
Oops. Try to make it bigger.
allows us to write composable code. So what exactly do I mean by composable? Well, an analogy that I came up with has to do with sculpting. If you think of the statue of David, for example, this statue was created originally from a single giant block of marble that was then sculpted down to the sculpture that we know today. So in the end, what results is one giant single piece that makes up this piece of art. Now, what if instead of starting with one giant piece, we instead used a bunch of small pieces to put together something that is greater? These are Lego bricks that obviously are small, each in their own right, that were put together to create something large. In this example, they all kind of work together to accomplish a goal, so to speak, the goal of looking like the statue of David. Now, this example is not perfect because the original statue of David obviously is more beautiful than this replica made of Lego bricks. But hopefully the concept makes sense. Let's look at an example in actual web development. What I have here is copy and pasted from the Bootstrap website. If you're not familiar with Bootstrap, that's really not important right now, but it's enough to know that these 30 or 40 lines of code, copy and pasted from the Bootstrap website, represent a navigation bar that is pre-styled. Now, in the old days of web development, a single page on a website was usually a single HTML page. So if this is just the nav bar, a lot of times those web pages would end up being thousands and thousands of lines of HTML code, essentially making it one giant sculpture. Well, with modern frameworks like React, we can take code like this and we can put it into our own custom components. And we can put those components together to make something that is larger. But in our case, our code becomes a lot more maintainable and a lot more flexible. You can see I've given these kind of silly names to show you that these are not regular HTML elements. I can combine elements together that are real HTML elements, like you see here, into my own custom component called, for example, my awesome navbar or my awesome footer. We're not quite ready to dive into the syntax of React quite yet, but I'm going to give you a taste of it and a chance to play with it before we move on. So let's see this in practice. Over here, you can see I have my React DOM.render, and I'm rendering a custom component called navbar. And if I scroll up, you'll get a chance to see how I created that navbar. As a quick aside, one thing you might notice.
Pausing it. How the hell do we get rid of this? It's in the way. Well, what's going on here? Double click? No. Come on, Scrimba. This ain't very good. Drag? No. What am I expected to do here? Move it? In there? What's that? Bookmark? What's that? Come on, Bob. How do I move this thingy out of the way? It moved then, didn't it? Rubbish. I'm going to have to reset it. It's not very good, is it? Start again.
Notice is that I'm using class called navbar. React quite yet, but I'm going to give you a taste of it and a chance to play with it before we move on. So let's see this in practice. Over here, you can see I have my React DOM.render, and I'm rendering a custom component called navbar. And if I scroll up, you'll get a chance to see how I created that navbar. As a quick aside, one thing you might notice is that I'm using class name everywhere instead of class. That's not a mistake. That's just how you have to assign classes in React. We're going to cover that later. But for now, I'd like to give you a challenge that's going to require you to deduce what I've done here and try to replicate it for yourself. So let me put that here. Okay, your challenge is to see the navbar component that I have created and see if you can deduce how to create your own component called main content. It can return something really simple like a single H1 element. And afterwards, I want you to render it below the navbar. You'll have to figure out how to render it below the navbar. Now, I've changed this a little bit for reasons that we'll talk about soon. But this line here, 51, this is where you're going to figure out how to render your own custom component main content. So first, build your custom component, looking at my example above to try and figure out how to do that. And secondly, render that component down here in React DOM.render. Pause the screencast and work on this challenge.
Okay, I have paused the screencast. So, composable, I guess, means you just create loads of little pieces called components. Like a nav bar, a header, a sidebar, footer, main content, and what have you. And then you piece them all together to make the main site, I guess. So that's what composable means. Creating it into little chunks. Right, so he's made the nav bar. What does he want me to do? Create your own custom component called main content and have it return a H1 element saying I'm learning React. Okay, so apologies for the dog barking outside. So function nav bar, return all that. Okay, so I guess we'll go in. Curly brackets. What's in this return statement? So that's just a general return statement that you see in JavaScript. Okay. Return. Content, I think he said, didn't he? Content. Oops. This good thing about Scrimba, it's even got it's even got undo, copy and paste. Right. What is going on? Right, sod it. I'll just type it out. Bigging it up. Right, copy main content. Put it in the wrong place. My fault. Right. So I guess it's an anonymous function. This is what it's returning. He's asked us to return one. I'm learning React. Grammar right. I'm learning React. So I've got that there, that there. Return. Obviously, he's got his. Let's copy the way he's laid it out then. Makes it a bit easier to read. So that's the return statement. Right, that's my first composable React component, I think. Very advanced. So that's that written. Now I guess we've got to call it, like call a function. Okay, afterward, render it below the nav bar, which you can do inside the React DOM render call below. Right. So I guess we're doing it like this. We're rendering it here, called main. Look at that. It's got autocomplete, not good. Spacebar lock, stop working. There's a big this platform up, it makes. Oh, the moment of truth. My first composable component in React. So you can either run. You can either hit run, click that, or command save. There's a lorry's outside. Boom, there it is. I am now a React developer. Let's play the rest of the vid.
Well, following the example above, we see that I created this component by creating a function. And the name of the function is the name of my component. So I will open up that function and return the content that I want to show up on my page. Above, I created a set of parentheses because I have many elements that I'm trying to return. I'll just do that just to keep things consistent for now. We'll create our H1 that says I'm learning React. And secondly, I can take my main content and I can render it by making it look kind of like an HTML element. In this case, it's a self-closing one, so I have main content as a single tag here. And if I hit save, we'll see that my H1 actually showed up on my page. And that's the concept of composability. It goes quite a bit deeper than this. We're going to see how we can make our components much more composable and reusable. But for now, let's move on to another reason why people really love React. And we'll cover that in the next lesson.
Okay, let's leave that. Written my first, look at the camera. Written my first React component there. Composable component. So why React? It's composable. So I guess this is currently all in a big JS file at the moment, but you can compartmentalize the components into their own files, I guess. Failing to see this, what this composable, the advantages are at the moment, but I guess all will become clear on the next video, which is why React, it's declarative. Let's just move on to that now. Can't be asked going into a video. Let's go. Let's do it. Screen back up.
Another major reason people love React is because it's something that we call declarative. So let's talk about declarative. To understand declarative, it's helpful to know that its opposite is something called imperative. When a program is declarative, we can simply tell it what should be done. More specifically, it's like the computer saying, just tell me what to do and I'll worry about all the nitty-gritty details on how to get it done. Its opposite, imperative, is when we need to tell the program how it should be done. Like the computer saying, I need you to describe to me every step along the way how to do something, and then I'll do it. Up until now, if you've mostly been just using vanilla JavaScript anytime you needed to create elements on the page, you've been doing it in an imperative way. In fact, let's go look at what that has been like. I've commented out my React DOM.render, and I'm going to put a challenge here for you. Okay, your challenge is to recreate this above line of code where we are rendering something to the screen using vanilla JavaScript by creating and appending an H1 to our div with the ID of root. We have our div ID of root. You'll need to select it and then append a new element. And I give you the step-by-step instructions right here. One little caveat is I don't want you using inner HTML because that kind of breaks the analogy down a little bit. Generally speaking, this is actually just a good way to practice the vanilla JavaScript that you have been learning so far. So it's always good to give it some practice. I'll give you a couple lines here, pause the screencast, and work on this challenge.
Well, it kind of goes back to what I was
Okay, let's work on
saying.
this. So I'm going to create.
Let's not. Hold your horses. What's his name again? Bob. Hold your horses, Bob. Let me pause. Right. Let's get back to this. Let's get rid of that. So this is the challenge. Recreate the above line of code in vanilla JavaScript by creating and appending a H1 to our div root without using HTML. Okay. Create a new H1 element. All right. Const. In vanilla JavaScript. Up. H1. Give it some text content. What does that mean? In this right. That's just kind of a string, isn't it? Not an element. Function. B3 score element function. On. Right. Yep. You need to use document create element. Right. Okay. I think I know what you mean. So we'll go in and element there. On syntax, the quotes. Which one? In content. In the what? Yes, it is. Well, that's worked. Ugh. Isn't it? Silly me. And then a JavaScript for a while equals, I don't know. A console. No, it hasn't. Which one? Yeah. What the hell? Give it a class of header. Okay. So that's a function. Do let. The property is it? Right. Element class. Okay. Don't you love programming? Oh, come on. Why not printing it? Why is it just saying it's a H1? Oh, in fact, can you do this? change the icon. Or can you? Oh. Oh, bollocks. Let's see how he does it.
Okay, let's work on this. So I'm going to create an H1 and I'll use document.createElement and I'll make an H1. And then if I'm giving it some text content, I need to use the text content property of this DOM node and set it equal to, I don't know, maybe this is an imperative way to program. Then I need to give it a class name. So I'll use the class name property here and set it equal to, I think we said header. And finally, I need to append it to my div with the ID of root. So first I need to say document.
I'll take over here. I want to do this. I know how to do this. Give it a class name if I append it as a child to the div root. Right. So document. No. Query selector. Div root. Selected it. Need new cons, don't we? Root. Using HTML. I'm not. Pen child.
Get
On Bob,
element by
take over.
ID root, and then use the append property or method to append my H1 to the DOM. So when I hit save, it should show up. This is an imperative way to program. Perfect. Now, this example is a little bit on the nose because if you were really just putting something static that had nothing to do with user interaction, you probably would just go to your HTML page and stick it right inside the div here, right? But with React, we're building our entire page in JavaScript. And so doing something imperatively this way, where I have to tell it step by step how to create the element and then to add some text content and then add a class name and then append it to the DOM, that's going to get old pretty fast, especially even with something mildly more complicated than a single H1, like a very simple web page like this. As soon as we have more than one element, suddenly our 4 lines of code will become probably dozens or maybe even hundreds of lines of JavaScript code just to create and append all of these elements in the correct order and in the correct way. And so that brings us back to the idea of writing our code declaratively, and React allows us to do that in a really simple way.
I'll tell you what, that is freaking awesome. Look how I just struggled then to remember how to do all that. Just to add a H1 to the root div. Imperative programming. I like it. Let's continue.
Way. As we see back up top, let me comment this out and uncomment this. We essentially get to write our JavaScript as if it were HTML. We are relying on React to figure out how to turn what we have declaratively written as an H1 into the JavaScript code that's needed to append it to the DOM. In fact, if I were being strict and wanted to make this more equivalent, in order to add a class name, I can just add a class name as if this were an HTML element. Again, this is class name instead of class for a good reason, which we'll talk about. But that's a pretty minor difference to be able to do all of these lines of code in one single section right here. And that difference is going to compound as we get into more and more complicated UIs like we see here. So at this point, I could probably continue talking about different reasons that we're choosing to use React and that it will be really beneficial for you to learn React. As you see on my little list here, it's a very hireable skill and it's actively maintained by really skilled people at Facebook. However, at this point, I think we're overdue to just jump into the syntax, get your hands on the keyboard, and start learning and practicing React. So when you're ready, let's keep moving forward.
Well, Bob, that is why I now understand why a lot of people use React and why it looks freaking awesome. Declarative programming beats imperative hands down. As you saw me, I can do that very basic thing of just adding a H1 to then giving it a class and adding it to the root element. Look how much I struggled. All the to and fro in between Google just to do something very basic. But as Bob's just said there, you can just write it. Let's make that a bit bigger. That line of code there. Make it a bit smaller. That. You can just write that HTML there within this component and React deals with it for you. So I guess in a way, it's hiding a lot of DOM scripting that can be quite painful, as was demonstrated in this video. Right, time for lunch, I think. So that was lesson 7, why React. It's declarative, and also why React, it's composable. So I think I get those two things now. Composable, it's all in manageable chunks called components, and declarative, it no longer means you have to program in an imperative way, which is do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. So declarative, I guess, means you just declare what should be done. Just tell me what to do and I'll worry about how I'll get it done. So you just declare, you tell React. You just tell React, print a H1 with this class in this area of the DOM. Lovely stuff. I think I get it now. Speak to you in the next vid, which will be JSX. Goodbye, CDNs. I'm glad I did this. Catch you later. See you in the next